Welcome everyone to this very special program on the occasion of World Children's Day. Today indeed is a very special day for billions of children and young people around the world because we're celebrating the 29th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And on this occasion we brought some special guests from different decision makers to young people who are going to discuss the key concerns, impressions and priorities of young Europeans today. So I would like to very much welcome our special guest from the European Parliament. We have Mrs. Linda McEwan, who is the chairperson of the Committee on Development. Welcome, Linda. And from the United Nations, and more specifically from UNICEF, we have Mrs. Charlotte Petri-Gornica, UNICEF Deputy Executive Director. Thank you, Charlotte, for being with us.
Thank you.
And then we have also young people. From Slovenia, we have Zala, who is a very accomplished musician and martial artist who is passionate about human rights. So you already have quite a curriculum. And finally, from Poland, we have Krzysztof, who is extremely interested in geopolitics and social issues, and who knows, maybe one day a future member of the European Parliament. So the format of this debate is very simple. We will introduce some topics, and the young people are going to ask you questions. We're looking for, short, concise, and simple answers, and to really a lively debate and discussion. So let me start by giving the floor to Zala, who is going to ask the first question.
So first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this debate. It's a really great opportunity for us to be able to hear more from those who work actively in these areas. So my first question is for the UNICEF Deputy Executive Director. So according to our survey that we've presented in the brochure, 2/3 of children and young people feel positive about migrants moving to their countries, including children. So why do you think kids are so open to diversity while oftentimes adults aren't and they feel differently?
Well, thank you. It's a very good question, and for me it was actually mind-blowing when I saw the results, because it's not necessarily what you hear when you're an adult and you discuss this situation. So for me it's been so useful, and I think, the survey also talk about you being curious. Who is that person? And that's something that I don't hear adults. I hear a little bit more of threat and fear when you get older. So do I have an answer to this? Probably you've got the answer. I think maybe what you do and what UNICEF talks a lot about is a child is a child in any situation, but we put labels perhaps on people the older we get. And you might not do that. You might look upon a child as, it's not discriminating, it's not, excluded. But the older we get, the more we put these boundaries. And I honestly think that we need to learn more about what happens. It's very important how you welcome migrants and in the school, obviously, that they get an early start, that they don't fall behind, because that's probably where things are starting to happen. When young adults don't get the job, and we start to be more segregated. I think there's something where UNICEF and you and others, you really need to work on a good integration. So this is an imperative to us from you. So.
Thank you so much, Zala. This was a strong start for the debate and a very honest response from Charlotte. So let me now give the floor to Krzysztof for the next question.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really glad to be here as part of this debate at the European Parliament. My question is to the MEP Linda McEwan. So the Europe Kids Want survey shows that children and young people are quite worried about the climate change, which is amongst the top 3 main concerns for the future. Do you think the European Union, as well as the European Parliament, is paying enough attention to this, or the politicians have different priorities than the children?
Well, I think that young people are absolutely right to be concerned about climate change, because it really is a threat to our planet and our way of life, not just in our countries in Europe, but I chair the Committee on Development, so some of the poorest people in the world, and they are already paying the price. It's not some future problem, it's happening now to them. Are we doing enough? No. We know because the scientists tell us that at the moment, no country is on track to deliver what we agreed to in Paris. So we all have to do more. It's true that the EU is doing more than other countries. We have targets and we also have a package of laws to deliver those targets. But we know governments are not all enthusiastic, and some are doing more than others. And I think what really needs to happen is in country, people like young people ought to put pressure on their own national politicians to make sure that they understand that this is a priority, because politicians react to pressure from the people who vote for them. So it's really, really important that you engage on this issue nationally as well.
Thank you so much. It's clear the planet today and tomorrow, this is what we're living. They don't belong to us adults. We're leaving that to children behind, and we hope we can leave it to you with solutions and not only problems. So we need to work today on this, and the young people are sending us a strong.
I'm very happy to hear it, and I really want you to do this campaign and make people like me and my colleagues do something more about climate change.
I would like now to turn towards another issue that children and young people have brought to our attention, and the statistics that we have from our survey, online survey. 53% of the respondents, the children and young people, are quite worried about not being able to find a job after they finish school. And so this is really worrisome. What is behind this fear? Zala, what would be your question?
So my question is for MEP, Ms. McKeven, and also it's related, to what you just said. So young people and children also feel that school isn't really preparing them enough for their lives. So life skills that they need aren't being taught in schools. So what can the EU do to prevent this? So to make them feel like their needs are being catered to more specifically, and that the curricula and quality of education are, up to a certain standard that they feel they need.
I'm guessing that the situation is different from different countries, that in different countries curriculums are very different, and of course it's responsibility of national governments what they put in the school curriculum. But maybe what the EU could do is to really compare, get countries to sit around the table and say what is working and what's not working, so that countries can learn from each other. I mean, there's been one of the big problems in recent years, a lot of pressure on public money, public funding, cuts. In my country, we have cuts. I'm a governor of schools in my city, and I know huge cuts in expenditure, which makes it more limited, fewer teachers, bigger class sizes. So this is having an impact as well. But I think at EU level, we could learn from each other, and it'd be interesting to hear more about why do young people feel ill-prepared for the world of work? Because employers say the same thing, so something's going wrong,
And maybe a follow-up question, just in short. What could we do for these young people and children? Because we know that they feel very stressed also. I mean, the school systems that we have right now are really intense, and we hear things like suicide rates going up even, and this is very concerning. So what are we doing wrong here, and what is it that we can do right? Where can we be better?
It's really interesting that, because I was talking this weekend to my sister who's a teacher, and she was saying a lot of children now go to after-school classes. Their parents are very ambitious for them, they want them to not fail their exams, and that's a new phenomenon, which we didn't have a number of years ago. And in Britain, we judge schools by the targets on how well the children perform at school. Well, in reality, we know that educating people is much more than about passing exams, learning things. So I think maybe in a desire, by creating too many league tables, obsessing only about exam results, we're probably putting too much pressure. We even test very young children, 7 years old, and they're not supposed to field the test. But this teacher, because the teacher is judged on how well they perform, inevitably there's a tension. And I think we don't need that for very young children in particular. So I think we should look again at how this works.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that we've all seen this stress among children and young people. And UNICEF, of course, for UNICEF, education is a big priority, and you're active in so many countries working on improving the education system. So what would you like to add to this, Charlotte?
Well, one thing is that we have to celebrate the fact that more young people actually have access to education, which, some years ago we didn't tick that box, and that's a good thing. So what UNICEF has done for many years is to focus on the content, on the quality, and but maybe perhaps also on young children. So what we are putting more emphasis on going forward is to start early, because we know that an early start is a good thing. Not necessarily all the tests, but to start early. Yeah. But also you have to provide a system where young people have the ability to stay, and a relevant curriculum. We know today that we need to focus on, obviously, maths and language, but also communication skills and critical thinking, the abilities that you need in your life, which are not necessarily about facts and figures. You need context to use your facts and figures. So that is a very important part of quality. But it's also the fact that young people are worried may also be because we don't actually know what will the job looks like. And that's something in the whole world. We are thinking about artificial intelligence, for instance. What will that mean? So we didn't really, and I'm not talking about UNICEF now, I'm talking about society as a whole. We didn't necessarily come together, the private sector and the public sector around education before. But now what we are trying to do in an initiative called Generation Unlimited is to make sure that we get private sector, public sector, civil society, young people, and innovate, if you will, or at least put a lot of imagination into what will future jobs look like. And it's important for us in this part of the world, but 60% of the 1.2 billion children in the world live in low and lower income countries. And for them, this challenge is huge. So for UNICEF, it's going to be a very, very important issue. Education, young and, follow through, but also the context in which we educate.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I think this generation... You have a follow-up question, Christoph?
I do have a follow-up because I strongly agree that there should be some cooperation between, for example, the schools or the universities and the public and private sector. There's actually a big problem of unpaid internships in some of the member states in the EU. So, and especially in the public sector, where it would be really crucial to get some cooperation and help to the young people, because without being paid for the internship, the inequalities just grow because, for example, just the richest people are kind of possible. It's just possible for them to participate in it. So how do you think the European Parliament or the European Union as a whole could tackle this problem?
Well, we might...
so sorry.
Maybe I should say something. I mean, I totally agree with you about internships, because it's, I think of myself, I could never have worked for nothing because my parents were rich enough to keep me. I could never have gone to London and spent 3 months working somewhere, come to Brussels with somebody else paying. It would not have been possible. So I think we should move away from this model, which is really about getting access for people. I mean, I can understand why parents want their, will contact friends, ring them up, find places. That's because they want the best for their children. But I think institutions should not allow it, because it's not equal, it's not fair, and it's not good access. So interns should be paid. It should be a proper process to recruit them, and it should be done. Otherwise, we just perpetuate sort of the elites running everything, and that's not a good system. And I think it's. I see increasingly all these adverts for unpaid work, and work should be paid. Work should be paid, and that's how it should work. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this support to all the young people who are becoming or will become interns. Christoph, I think you also have a question on youth participation.
Yes, thank you. So my next question is on youth participation. So we're here today debating on such important issues concerning our present and our future. We've been preparing for this for months, and we feel very motivated and inspired for having the opportunity to voice our concerns and ideas. But we would like to exchange. We'd like this exchange to happen more often. So my question is to Ms. McEwen: how can the European Parliament help us to do this and open its doors more often for children? and young people beyond the World Children's Day? Because the annual meeting is just not enough.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I mean, somebody said to me, oh, we have these youth parliaments and things like that, but they're only very small initiatives. In reality, they touch handfuls of young people, and it's very difficult. I think to engage, it's really at national level where politicians have to engage. And in different countries, they have different styles of doing it. It's not easy. I mean, I don't know. It's not easy. People say, oh, you should engage with young people. It's not always easy because all of us engage with things we're interested in. And so for people to engage in politics, they really have to have it capture their imagination because there's so many things that people want to spend their time doing at the moment. You know, they want to be their friends, they want to do things. So politicians have to find issues that people care about, that they engage with. And then I think they will get sort of interest from younger people. And we see, for example, in my country, we have Brexit. For me, it's a disaster, I think. I think it's a wrong decision. But it's actually shown a huge increase in the numbers of young people getting active in politics because they're really concerned. They feel it's very much about their future. So people will engage when they feel they can change things, when it matters, and when their voice really counts. I don't think the kind of other engagements, yeah, you can do them, they're nice, but they're not really engagement of all society.
Mm-hmm. And how could we extend this maybe to UNICEF? What can you do to encourage, and maybe even other non-governmental organizations? What could you do to encourage people, young people, to participate more?
One of the things we should avoid is to invite a small group of young people and say, now we've talked to them. Yeah. And I have experienced that before, and I think what UNICEF is trying to do is much more honest than that. Within this Generation Unlimited, we have you reporters, unlimited reporters, which is, you know, young people who register as journalists, if you will, and they use the new technologies to debate amongst them, and that's, you know, that's to provide a channel and a platform. But honestly, I do think that also civil society and yourself could also think about advocating for, you know, being able to vote in earlier ages, like 16. It was a big debate, and it was a big debate in my country as well, in Sweden, and there are obviously a reason to debate that. But one of the things that are, I mean, it might be for real, because then politicians also have to take into account to visit schools and to perhaps be a bit more targeting the issues that are at heart of young people. So I would think that what UNICEF can do together with partners is to put some pressure, but also do things concretely, like you reporters, like job creation opportunities with others. So it's a combination of practice and advocacy. And you also talked earlier on, school is also a place where we have some pressures today, but bullying, mental illness and all of that. I think we might have to start to talk about the Child Rights Convention. Next year we celebrate 30 years. Maybe we need also to start to involve parents in this discussion and look into how they engage in around schools, because sometimes we don't engage in the tough issues, and we put a lot of pressure on schools and teachers. So I also think that there is something around awareness of the rights of the child and behaviors that we could perhaps push a little bit further.
Maybe I could just make a plea that we don't forget children and young people in the poorest countries.
Absolutely.
I mean, because I've seen some fabulous UNICEF projects.
Yes.
Some of I saw one in DRC Congo, you know, in a really difficult community with people who have literally nothing, and those voices, it'd be good that those voices are heard by young people like yourselves to understand what is really going on in many countries. So I think UNICEF can play a fantastic role in bridging the North-South divide as well, and we talk about sustainable development goals. So we all understand that we share one planet, back to the climate change.
And UNICEF is actually pushing again the EU to, in their external policies around development, to have a bit of a more overarching framework for the children's and youth agenda, rather than very good projects and programs, and really a holistic strategy. So you can help us there to push.
I think Christoph is burning to say something on that.
I would really like to come back to the climate change issue, and I believe here the European Parliament is like the house of the and the first step of the change. So during the debate yesterday, we've seen a lot of plastic bottles of water. Could that be maybe somehow changed? Because I know that actually my university in the UK actually is doing that, and we're going plastic free. So maybe the European Parliament should be actually the spark of the change.
I absolutely agree with you. Years ago, I was on the Environment Committee for many years, and I used to say, why don't we recycle our stuff here? We didn't even recycle our own things. Now we have everywhere recycling. It took a lot of time. It took years for that to happen. On the plastic, they are changing. They're putting water fountains on different floors, and they're phasing out the plastic. But yeah, there's a lot more. We have to. Yeah, you can't preach to other people what you don't do yourself. And I think people come into this building and they see, I mean, we have fair trade tea and coffee and things like this. I did a lot of work to get fair trade products on sale here, and now we have to do a lot more about plastic.
All right. So from plastic bottles in the Parliament to youth participation in EU institutions and beyond, I think we've covered a very wide range of issues, and I think the debate on youth participation is not over. This is something we will keep putting on the table, and we count very much on the support of the Parliament and of course on the voice of young people themselves to make this a reality. So let's hope that by the next anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the 20th of November 2019, let's hope we can report on some progress, and that we have taken at least one step forward. In the next few minutes, I would like to invite all of you to maybe say a word of conclusion. And let me start with the young people, if you allow me. So, Christoph, what would be your 1 minute of conclusion and wisdom?
I would actually refer to both climate change and participation. So my wish is maybe not me, but some of my young colleagues come here next year, so there not to be any plastic bottles, if that's possible. We'll see about that. But also the participation, I guess it should be more with start with the local MPs, and actually get some local debate first, so that the young people's voice is being heard, and then just go up. And also to go to the European Parliament with the message, and maybe try to introduce a system of voting about the most pressing issues at the time, which can be later discussed during some Q&A session, for example, like via social media with the MPs, because I know it's going on right now, but maybe it's not implemented in the right way.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Very concrete suggestions. And you, Zala, what are your concluding remarks?
My wish is that young people would participate more, and it's not enough that we just talk about issues, we need to do things. So I want for us to come up with solid, tangible solutions for the issues that we're facing, but also I want people to get angry. I want them to see, okay, this is what is going on and nothing is happening, even though we're talking about it all the time, because we're talking about climate change. You hear about it everywhere, but why aren't we doing anything? I mean, we're doing things, but it's not enough. So how can we get people to be angry and then start making change? So that's what I would like, especially for young people, because right now they're not even listening, so we need them to listen and get angry.
So we need a wake-up call and the energy of young people. Linda, what would be your conclusion?
Well, I think that's a really good idea, because politicians react and work within climates. And they have to fight battles here. To get the climate change legislation through this Parliament was very difficult, a lot of opposition. And so it's the grassroots that matter. When we're voting something, that people say to their members of Parliament, you're voting next week, we think you should do this. And don't forget, I said, unless you're British at the moment, there'll be European elections next year. And so there'll be candidates for those elections. So, you could engage with those candidates, ask them questions, invite them, ask them what they're going to do about climate change when they come to this Parliament. I mean, we have colleagues who are trying to block out the work we do. So you can make pressure on them, but help us to create the climate in which good political decisions are made.
Thank you, Linda. I think the passion is also on the adult side, so that's nice to see. And Charlotte,
well, it's so easy to agree. I mean, it's all been said. So maybe then my job is to complicate things, because I sincerely agree that we need to put climate change higher on the agenda, because that's where we really, really see time pressure. But my experience is that we have not been successful in actually having a holistic agenda. So when we do climate change, we tend to forget that we still have to work hard for young people with disabilities, for instance. We just have to be able to have some issues on the agenda at the same time.
So Sustainable Development Goals.
Exactly. That's why we have the 70 Sustainable Development Goals. They might be too many of them, but it is about an equal society within planetary boundaries. And I would say young participation in reality around that agenda. And UNICEF will do what we can to engage both in developed countries and in lesser advantage circumstances for children to make that happen. So.
Thank you. So we know we can count on the support of UNICEF and at least some MEPs as well. So thank you very much, Christophe, Zala, Linda, and Charlotte. Many thanks for your energy and enthusiasm and ideas. And wherever you are, we all wish you a fantastic World Children's Day, especially if you're under 18. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Today is World Children's Day, and we celebrate today the 29th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'm now with very special guests next to me, broadcasting directly from the European Parliament studios in Brussels. And we're here to debate some of the main concerns and impressions of European children that they have about the society we live in and their concerns for the future. The discussions will be based on a joint survey that was carried out by UNICEF and Eurochild, which was developed by children and children's experts, and it was launched in June this year. We gathered over 14,000 answers from children from all over Europe, from 23 countries, more than 38,000 answers, responses to the topics on school safety, family environment, climate change, and the online behavior. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our participants. From the European Parliament, on my left-hand side, here is Mrs. Jean Lambert. She's Vice Chair of the European Parliament Intergroup on Children's Rights. She's also coordinator for her group, the Green Party, in the Employment Committee of the European Parliament. On my right-hand side, I have Mr. Charles Goerens. He's a member of the Human Rights Committee, the subcommittee, and also of the Development Committee in the European Parliament. And you're from the Alliance of Liberals and Democratic Group. Welcome, Mr. Goerens. Then from Cyprus, we have our first voice of the youth, Sean, on my right-hand side. And the second young voice here is from Johanna. Sorry, from Ireland. I'm sorry, apologies. From Ireland we have Sean, and from Cyprus we have Johanna. Very much welcome to this debate. So the debate will be quite simple. I'm going to facilitate the conversation, and the young people are going to ask you questions. And yeah, each person, I hope you will all be able to answer this in a conscious way as possible. So Johanna, I would like to give you first the floor.
Thanks a lot. I'm really pleased to participate in this debate. It's a great opportunity for us to hear from those who work on such big issues and for us to be heard. My first question is to Mr. Goerens. You're active on the topic of children's rights in migration and in the world. So the UNICEF Eurochild survey reveals that 2/3 of children and young people are feeling positive about immigrants moving to their countries. So why are kids so open to diversity and oftentimes adults aren't?
Well, that's on the one hand good news, on the other hand bad news, because 2/3 of children are rather positive vis-à-vis immigration. That's positive. That means that 1/3 is not positive or quite indifferent. We must convince people that it's important to accept diversity because diversity is in everybody's interest. Why are 2/3 of children positive? I guess it's due to the fact that children are not shaped by economic or political standards. They are still open-minded. They are discovering the world. And that's very interesting, that's fascinating, and I think this dynamics is at the origin of this positive feeling.
Okay, it's a very important question and a very interesting viewpoint shared. Thank you, Mr. Goerens. Now, Sean, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I'm also very glad to be part of this debate here at the European Parliament. My question is for MEP Jean Lambert. The Eurokids One survey shows that children and young people are quite worried about climate change that will affect our lives. It is among top 3 concerns for the future. Do you think the European Union is paying enough attention to this, or do politicians have different views from children?
Well, I think young people are really quite right to be very worried about the impact that climate change will have is having now, as well as into the future. And I think, if you're looking at the recent reports from the UN panel on climate change, that's really a wake-up call. And so to see movements in some countries like Extinction Rebellion getting underway with people saying, look, we're fed up waiting, we need to do more, is really important. For the European Union, I think it's taken seriously. I think that, you know, that there are quite a lot of very solid policies around, that if you look at what the proposals are for the cohesion funds for the European Union, what we pay, you know, the European Social Fund and regional development, that 20% of that over the last 6-7 years has had to go for climate change related things. The proposal for the next budget is 25%. And there's a lot there on, you know, circular economy, renewable energies. Is it enough? Well, I'm from the Greens. I'm going to tell you that it's not enough, and that we need to be doing much more, for example, to stop investing in fossil fuels and really to switch that money to renewables, and to make sure that what we're doing is really integrated as part of our policy and not something that sits sort of in the Environment Committee or somewhere else. You know, it runs across every area of policy, and we're still not good at integrating that, and some national governments, you know, are really, what's the polite way to put it? I think some national governments are more rubbish than others at doing that. So it's also, you know, how the national governments really get in tune with this too.
Okay, thank you. Another great issue, and thank you for your viewpoint, because I think our planet really needs adults that listen more to young people when it comes to climate change. And also because they're the ones inheriting the problem when they grow up and get older. Now, I just would like to throw another statistic before the next question, still focusing on the main concerns of children and young people on their future. Listen to this. The joint UNICEF-Eurochild survey revealed that 53% of children and young people are quite worried about being able to find a job when they finish school. And I wonder what is behind this fear. So, Johanna, please, could you ask the next question?
Thanks. My next question goes to MEP Jean Lambert, and it's actually related to what you've just highlighted. The survey shows that 74% of children and young people who participated think schools are not preparing them well enough for the future, and that, of course, causes insecure about employment. So how can the European Union help with this and make sure that all European Union countries improve the quality of education and offer skills that are relevant for our world? And Mr. Lambert, I read that you were a teacher before you were elected for the European Parliament. So what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, you're right. I was a teacher before I came here, secondary school level, and I think this is something that was the case many years ago when I was doing that, and people still feel it now. I mean, of course, the European Union has limited what we call competencies in terms of education. That's very much, you know, what member states do. They organise it themselves, you know. So a lot of it is with them. But obviously, there are ways in which we try and share expertise for a start. That from the Employment and Social Affairs Committee that I'm on, we've been doing a lot of work recently on issues around skills and skills preparedness, skills matching. So we've been looking at the education system, so it's a Culture and Education Committee here, and we try and put people in touch with what's happening in other member states, so they can see that, look, you know, Finland seems to be doing really well, you know, high level of skilled people, you know, graduates. Why is that? What is it that's special about their education system? What can we learn about Germany's education system that, you know, doesn't dismiss skilled tradesmen, skilled craftsmen? Some of our member states, you know, the idea that you get your hands dirty is seen as second-class work. In Germany, that's not the case. So some of it is about that exchange. Also, the investment that we put into skills through things such as the social fund, you know, which really helps member states to concentrate perhaps on less on the people who, if you like, are the more obvious sort of school to university to whatever, but maybe those that have dropped out of school, are less qualified, to really try and help those people into the labour market. So there's things that we do there. There are now skills programmes going on that the Commission's working on, for example, on one of them with renewable energies that I'm particularly interested in. They're looking also at textiles, at various skills sectors, about what can be done there to improve the level of education, improve that level of skills. But it's not just about skills now, it's also about, do people have the basics? Are they literate? Are they numerate? Are they digitally skilled? You know, do they have languages? Do they have those core skills that whatever happens in your working life means you've got a sound base that you can move from?
As a Cypriot student, I can comment on the Cypriot education system, which is okay, but I think that when we are talking about education, okay, is not good enough. So there are being tries in order to improve the education system, and we have the Cyprus Children Parliament, which I'm a member of, and we had the chance to speak with politicians and ministers in Cyprus about different topics such as education, and I'm really glad to say that I saw that our comments have taken into consideration, and now we're all trying together to improve the quality of our education. So I believe that in matters such as education, which affect us immediately, the children, we should all have a say on it. So, yeah.
No, I think it's really important to actually hear the voices of those who are in the education system.
Yeah.
That a lot of the emphasis goes on, what do employers want? What do your parents want? What do teachers want? And the people who get left out are the ones that are actually sitting, you know, in the room, supposedly developing an education. So how that works and how you see it, I think that dynamic is really important. Yeah. And that would be good practice that all member states could learn from.
Yeah, that's why I'm telling you.
So this is, you know, this is something that can be put into the mix. Events like, you know, what's happening here today also help. And I think, you know, we need to be building that in much more. And it's one of the things that we try to do here, you know, in the all-party group on children's rights, is to actually try and improve our listening skills as politicians, you know.
Well, that's really good to hear, and also to hear from your experience, Joanna, in Cyprus. Mr. Goerens, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, I would like to stress that the European Union is far from being a social union. We have too less social standards laid down in our treaty, but that was not the reason for the European Union to keep inactive. The opposite was true. A few years ago, the European Union launched an initiative called European Youth Initiative. That means that all the member states of the European Union agreed on having a kind of initiative in their member states in order to provide work to young people. If that was not the case, they had to offer a new learning process, new efforts should have been done in this regard. And that's a good initiative. And we have 28 action plans through the European Union. And, well, I think we have already got some positive results. But unfortunately, the European Union has a lack of solidarity among member states. If you take, for instance, the economic crisis in Greece, the most suffering people were young people. People in schooling age or people in the age of being ready for the labor market. Unfortunately, due to the austerity, which was a very strong one in Greece, people didn't find a job. And that must be, we have to overcome this situation by providing more funds to Greece on the one hand. Of course, they have to agree on reforms. But they could not do it on their own because it was so difficult, and the difficulties were so important that it was quite impossible to overcome this situation in a short term. And that's the reason why we have to reflect on the future of Europe. Once the United Kingdom has left the European Union, that will be the case the 29th of March 2019. The European Union will have a new meeting in Sibiu, Romania, in order to see what should be done in the future, in order to have to be better prepared, in particular for young people, to find their way. We have to tackle with a difficult impact of the globalization on the EU. We know globalization can be positive in certain sense, but not automatically. We have to adapt our social system, our economic system, in order to provide more opportunities to young people.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goerens. It's also a very interesting point of view and important to share that. I would like to move on to the next round of questions, and you already touched a little bit on what Sean is going to ask now.
Thank you. I live in Monaghan, Ireland, and the border is in fact visible from my house. So as we are joined by MEP Lambert here representing the UK, I'd like to know how are you representing the views of children in negotiations that are taking place in Brexit?
I think that in many ways it's children and young people that have been really quite left out of a lot of this decision making, partly because, of course, in the referendum it was only those over 18 at the time that were able to vote, not 16-year-olds. And you can see from the referendum results a real a generational difference in the way in which people looked at their future together with the European Union. So I think that the voices are there. They're there in organisations, sort of Our Future, Our Choice, various of the student bodies and so on, but they're certainly not structured in any sort of way to the national government that I can see. I mean, I'm in the European Parliament, not in Westminster, which I'm very grateful at this point, I think. But, I think business has been listened to. Well, they would argue they're not being listened to properly. A lot of people aren't within this. It's becoming an internal battle for certain parties. So I think that we need to do more to make sure that young people's voices are heard in this, and that young people also need to be shouting, certainly from the UK side of it, to their members of the national parliament, into the government, to actually make the point that it's your future. A lot of those that voted to leave, won't be around probably to see the full consequences of that. And I think it's really worrying that we're not looking enough at. I mean, you will gather I'm a convinced Remainer, yeah?
Yes.
And I think that what we have done in terms of reducing the opportunities for young people is really shocking. And therefore, in whatever is happening next, whether the future agreement with the European Union, we need to be very, very clear that opportunities on education, on travel, all of those interlinking, all of those connections, we try and make sure we keep as many of those as possible. We can't, we're not there to be a little sort of closed-off island.
And how will Brexit affect foreign students who want to study a third level in the UK?
I think most things that, unfortunately, still in terms of that future relationship between the UK and the European Union are still very unclear, very undefined. I think, for the children, young people who want to study there, who've already started their studies or will start during the transition period, they have assurances from the government that they will be able to see their course through, to finish that, to have the qualifications, which of course at the moment most of those, certainly university qualifications, are recognised, and we would want to, I would hope, try and make sure that we continue to do recognition of qualifications both ways. It's something that from the Employment Committee we've been saying the European Union needs to do more on recognising third country qualifications, so they could start by making sure there's a continuity with the UK, providing the UK is sensible enough to want to do that. For what happens after that, for people who have not started during the transition period, it really looks as if the government could be thinking about treating those as third country nationals for the UK, with all of what that means for student fees, which are horrendous. And I think that, you know, this is something that the government, well, it needs to be looking at fees anyway. You shouldn't be starting young people's lives with mountains of debt, but also to try and make sure that we can keep those doors open and that knowledge circulating. You know, the UK benefits enormously from EU research programmes. You know, and the idea that we're actually going to cut ourselves off from that, make ourselves less important in the world of research, future jobs, all of what you were saying, you know?
Yeah.
Totally
okay.
Unwise.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
I just add one word to that. As you know, there was a demonstration, pro-European demonstration in London a few months ago. I have never seen 700 people, most of them young people, gathering in Brussels, in France, in Paris, in Athens, in Berlin, asking for more Europe. Underlining, giving emphasis to the importance of respecting human rights, fundamental values. The most convinced Europeans are among the young British people nowadays. It's a lesson we learn at your expense. And Brexit is in nobody's interest. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody, for the European Union as well as for the United Kingdom.
And I think if we're looking at, you know, as you were saying, that what people can be learning from each other at the moment, one of the things is that, you know, as we in the UK can see what we're losing, other people need to make sure that, you know, all the criticisms you might have of the European Union, and a lot of them are quite justified, you just heard my colleague talking about some of them, you know, it still remains an extremely important body on the world stage, and that what we gain from it is enormous. And, you know, when you're criticising, please don't forget to tell people why it matters, you know, and that the criticism is to make it better, not to destroy it, I would hope. You know?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think, Johanna, you wanted to...
my next question is for Mr. Goerens. We have learned and enjoyed discussing ideas with MEPs over the past 2 days. How can the European Parliament help us get our views out? Shouldn't it be more open to children and young people beyond the World Children's Day?
Well, I must say, first of all, above all, that the European Parliament is an open house. You can come in, you can inform yourself in the committees. Everybody can reach or meet people here. Committee meetings are open. Most of them are web streamed. You have a lot of informations at your disposal. And of course you can contact your MEP. Coming from Cyprus, it's not very difficult. I am also from a small country. The opportunities to meet an MEP are given in a smaller country. In the United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, is more difficult. But nevertheless, let's seize this opportunity and the close relationship with an MEP. MEPs can also come to school and have an exchange of views with young people. I expect young people expressing themselves on their own future. That's very important to us.
Thank you very much. I think actually our time is almost finished, and I hope that these ideas that we have been discussing here today will be taken forward in 2019 and also into the next year, when we will be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the UN Convention on Children's Rights. And we hope that then the UN Convention will be an important marker to progress on realizing the rights of children. So we'd like to thank both MEPs, Mr. Goerens and Mrs. Lambert, but also the young people, Johanna and Sean, for participating in this very interesting debate. And I would like to say, let's continue and celebrate World Children's Day. And
for us, it's also very interesting because it's the first time I meet you at the same panel.
Okay, well, that's an additional, really joyful event. Thank you very much for your time and your commitments, and enjoy the rest of World Children's Day.
Thank you.
Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the studio of the European Parliament. We are here today celebrating the World Children's Day, and we have the opportunity to have a very interesting panel to discuss about that. Today is also the 29th anniversary of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, so another obviously important moment to celebrate. A special guest from the EP, as I said, broadcasting to discuss a number of important issues and the opinions of children and young people about what they think about society, what they think about climate change, about safety, and also about their hopes for the future, because they are young and they have the whole future in front of them. We are going to discuss a number of things that I just want to present that are coming out of the Europe Kids Want. It was a survey that UNICEF and Eurochild launched in June, and it was quite massive. We got about nearly 14,000 answers, children and young people from 23 countries, even 38,000 responses. So it was quite interesting to see the response. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce Elise Len. She's a member of the European Parliament and a member of the Committee on Development, but also works on LIBE, on liberal civil liberties. Sorry. I would like to introduce Carla from Germany and also Ebru from Ireland. Yeah. And the format is going to be, very kind of easy, questions, answers, and feel free to, get into the conversation. Carla, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So our first question would be, the UNICEF Eurochild survey has shown that 2/3 of children and young people feel positive and open towards migrants moving to their countries, including children. And our question is now, why are those opinions of children and adults so different? Why are the kids so open to diversity, but oftentimes adults aren't?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for this occasion to discuss today very important issues. Why is this? Probably because, if you think about it, the fear of migration is very often driven by misperception of the phenomenon. The rhetoric against migrants is not very often based on true data. For example, on the phenomenon, we see many people talking about an invasion, and if you look at the data, there is not an invasion. In the year of the highest number of asylum requests in Europe, we had about 1.3 million, which is impressive and dramatic, of course, but we're a continent of 500 million inhabitants, so we're talking about 0.25% of the European population, nothing that the 28 governments of the European Union and the EU itself cannot deal with common European solution to welcome in a dignified manner with the respect of human rights of migrants. But why children have this positive perception? Well, that's good news for a start, maybe because they're less exposed to the rhetoric against migrants driven by social media, sometimes with fake news as well, but also by the general media, in which there is very often a superficial view and interpretation of the phenomenon that forgets that there are people behind the numbers, people with stories and with things for which they are fleeing. So I think that kids play together, and they see no difference on the color of the skin. And probably there is no best chance for integration than school. Myself, I was in school in the 90s with many people from different countries, especially escaping from the wars of the Balkans. And there's no better opportunity than school to grow up together and to understand that with all our differences, which are a value, we are all equal in the rights and opportunities that we should have. So I'm hopeful of this.
May I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the question that I have right now is, so you are positive about the mindset that children have towards migrants, right? Do you think that there's anything, and if yes, what is that the EU can do to keep this mindset inside children's heads, so that in the future we will be more open towards migrants?
I think, yes, there is a lot we can do by providing information on this phenomenon, migration, and also by providing better laws and regulation, because there is obviously a problem in the European policy on migration and asylum, and in this House we are working a lot on it in order to ensure solidarity and equal sharing of responsibilities among all member states of the European Union. This is the principle at all levels. To have a good, widespread reception of migrants and asylum seekers, the only way is to share equal responsibility at the European, at the national and at the local level. What can we do, especially in school? We can give voice to the stories of migrants, ask them to tell us what are their experience and how it was to change completely society and background and cultural environment. So to give voice on one hand, but I think it's also a natural phenomenon. I mean, as I said, in school, growing up together, starting by playing together as kids, it makes you feel that we are all part of the same people, and so I think that it's gonna be quite natural, and we can also accompany this phenomenon, and maybe we should learn something from children because of this openness. We are already a multicultural society. The story of Europe is a culture of diversity coming together and enriching everyone. So we have to be faithful to our history and be hopeful on this natural process that with the new generation will be, I think, will be better than us in dealing with this issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the questions that, I mean, besides the question of migration, which is a global challenge, and it's not only Europe, it's a global phenomena.
Absolutely.
But another important phenomena that obviously needs to tackle in a global manner is the question of climate change. And Ebun wants to speak about that.
Yeah. The Europe Kids survey shows that children and young people are quite worried about climate change, which affect their lives. So do you think the European Union pays enough attention to this? Or politicians have different priorities than children?
That's a very interesting question. Thanks for that. Again, I think we must learn something from kids and youth in this sense. It's a one of the main challenges on which the future of the European Union and of the new generation is at stake. And I'm not surprised by the fact that kids and young people in general are worried about what is going on. It is clear. Have you seen the picture of what happened in the last weeks in Italy, my country, for example? Floods, people losing sometimes lives, sometimes their homes because of the strong rain, because of climate events that are more and more extreme. So the point is the political discussion aware enough of the risks? And the answer is no, unfortunately, but not everywhere. This Parliament, for example, we have in these years set very high standards on combating the effects of climate change on the three main points: reduction of the emissions. The second point is how we change our economies in order to be more sustainable. So we need, let's say, an ecological transition of our economies, for example, by fostering and supporting alternative energy. And there are projects and funds by the European Union that try to go in that direction. At the same time, there is also the point of energy efficiency. And also, we have to be clear on that. It's not only the policies when it comes to address the effects of climate change. It's also a matter of how every one of us has a responsibility in changing its own behavior and habits in order to be coherent with this process of going towards a more sustainable future. And this is something on which I think the European Union has a special responsibility. All of us, children and young people, again, I hope will be better than us, but already today we have set up the climate change agreement in Paris. Who better than the European Union can lead by example in the implementation of this agreement when very important actors at the global level, unfortunately, are forgetting their responsibility and calling out from very important agreement and targets fixed in the agreement. So again, we have to call on the EU to lead by example and be even more ambitious in addressing climate change.
Does the EU have a specific plan on how to get non-EU member states again on board with the Paris Agreement, for example? You know, the US and China, they're really, really, really big countries, are global players, and they play a big role regarding climate change?
Yes, I think it's a once you have first of all to build a political momentum, and we've seen it with the Paris Agreement, and also whenever we approve new measures, for example against plastic just a couple of weeks ago, there is interest of the European citizens. So what can the EU do? The EU again should try to work in a framework of the international community. I really have faith in multilateralism. I know multilateralism is nowadays unfortunately at risk, but again, these are European and global challenges. So we have to realize that the Union makes the strength. So if we are able at the European level to find a common and stronger voice on this issue as the EU instead of 28 different member states, we will be also stronger at the international level in the multilateral framework in order to push the big actors at the global level to go in the same direction. So again, I think that we need a European strong voice on these issues to be able to press and to push the others in the same direction.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's really a plan to bring on board others, but definitely working together and really having, let's say, leading by example, it would be one of the best ways forward.
Yeah.
And
you don't have a mandatory framework, unfortunately,
so
and we would need that. We would need also sanctionable targets because you know all governments also always try to have commitments, but like a shake of hands, and not targets with sanctions, which I think would be very appropriate.
Yeah, and we are running out of time, especially about climate change, so that's important to work on that.
Absolutely.
Talking about the future, and it was one of the things that came out in the survey that was interesting is somehow the gap between what young people are taught at school and the future they're facing at the jobs. And in fact, they were saying 74% of children that participated in the survey, they were saying school does not really prepare well for the future. So they feel, okay, they're learning a number of things, but not really what is in need. So, Carla, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's true. So it's exactly the way that it was already said, and the fact that we're not actually prepared at school for our future also makes us worry about employment, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen, especially, I think that's, again, connected to maybe the refugee crisis. We believe, or some people believe, that they will take away our jobs, and we don't know what will be in the future. And our question is there a way, or in which way can the EU itself help to ease this fear and ensure that member states are looking more carefully into the school curricula and the quality of education, especially regarding the future of those students?
Well, that's a very important point. You know that unfortunately the competences of the EU on education are not, let's say, enough because as in many other topics, member states have been very jealous of their prerogatives and competences, and sometimes this attitude has led to the incapability of putting in common the competence that we need to address this issue at an upper and more adequate, according to me, level to give answers to the worries of the young people in this case. So what can the EU do? For example, we provide some very important programs and funds. You would know the Erasmus and the Erasmus Plus program that has done a lot in this sense. But the point is even more deep. If you think about it, we are in times where society has gone through enormous change and transition. Think only about automation and how the new technology have changed deeply the productive processes. Absolutely. And what can the EU do? First of all, we have to make sure that the added value of these new technologies are redistributed through society. And this goes together with also the other very European challenge, which is tax justice. And we have to avoid to have tax havens within the European Union and try to make sure that multinational companies that are making the profits out of the new technology also pay the fair share of taxes. Why am I making this premise? Because we are all often told that there are no resources to put into education, to put into innovation, to put into research. This is not true. We have to have a strong political will of the EU to support innovation, to support the quality of production and not only the quantity of production, and also to support research. Many researchers in my country cannot make it to the end of the month because there are not enough resources. So we need to change the way we think and our mentality and make sure that we support this process, because this will pave the way for all people in education to find their way to make their competences and knowledge valuable in the European job market and in the global job market. So just to make a conclusion, I think that we have a wonderful new framework for 2030, which is the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that were approved in 2015 in the UN Assembly. I was there as well to represent the Parliament with other colleagues. One of the let's say one of the goals is specifically to make sure that everyone has access to a good quality education. So all the policies of the European Union should try to align to this very important target, because if we want to reduce inequalities, we have to start from school by providing to everyone the same opportunities to get formed, to get information, and to get an opportunity for their future.
Okay. You mentioned this change in the mindset of people, but you also mentioned that, you know, in our modern world, technology is becoming more and more important. Do you think that, because especially if we're looking about this point of feeling insecure about employment, we believe that people who are especially working in like social jobs, right? For example, a nurse. Their job gets less and less importance, although it actually should gain importance because people are aging faster and they're getting older, right? Do you think that there needs to be a change in the mindset as well?
Absolutely, yes. I think so. We are faced with enormous challenges, but just to make a quick example, it's true. Our society are aging quickly, so the support and the social workers will have to be instead strengthened. But the point is, again, where are the resources when we are told that there are no resources to provide good services also to people who are getting old, for example, or people who have illnesses and need assistance? The so-called welfare state was reduced in these years of crisis. But at the same time, we see that let's say the wealth is more and more concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So that's why I'm insisting on the need for the European Union to find a way to address tax evasion and tax avoidance, especially of multinational companies, because somebody is gaining tremendous profits while more and more people are having difficulties every day and do not even have from the state and from the European Union enough services. So we have to rebalance this. This is the mindset that we have to change. It's not true that the resources are not there. We have to take them where they are too concentrated, and we have to redistribute them by supporting all these kind of services that can also provide for good jobs.
Yeah, definitely. I might come in here because the questions, as we know, the importance of getting a job and being prepared for a job, and especially in countries where there's a huge high young unemployment, like in Spain, like in Greece. So I think the question of how the young people can actually participate, I think, is one of the main worries of Edwin. I wanted to give him the last question.
Yeah, I wanted to actually change this question. So I was wondering, like, what specific steps are the EU doing to combat racism and help cultural integration? Because it's obvious, like Europe had a big hand in like kind of destroying like cultures from outside Europe and colonizing it, and with imperialism and all that. And that's a problem. So that was a problem that was kind of solved back then. And I want to know what Europe are kind of doing to kind of like break that and to kind of integrate the people that they kind of were belittling before and to break stereotypes? So what are Europe doing?
Okay.
Well, it's a very good question. My first answer, to be honest, is that we're not doing enough. It's clear, because racism, xenophobia, homophobia are rising in our society. And why is that, and what can we do? First of all, again, we have a small budget, unfortunately, because you know that the budget of the EU is about 1% of the European Union's GDP, which is clearly not enough if we want the EU to be able to address the main challenges for our future. But within that budget, we can support programs that go in the direction of fighting racism and try to, let's say, support and promote an integration of different culture and different languages. And there are a lot of projects that already do it in the European Union. Just to mention one, yesterday here we had hundreds of young people coming from, I think, the 28 member states, gathering here. There is no better way to give voices to the youth, especially, to just leave them our place and listen to them. That's what we did. The Erasmus project go in the same direction. You cannot do a project without having partners in other countries. And all these projects have to promote the European values, including social inclusion and the rejection of any kind of racism and intolerance. The point is even more difficult, because what is fostering racism today, it's also the lack of answers on integration of migrants and refugees in our society, which are not exclusively the competence of the European Union, but the European Union can have a strong say with member states and can, most of all, improve its own legislation in order to have, let's say, as I said, an equal sharing of responsibilities among everyone. If we go in that direction, I'm sure there is nothing to be afraid of, and we cannot forget our history. Because I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago, where 140,000 Jews were killed by the Nazis, and not only the Nazis, but who cooperated with the Nazis at the local level. And I felt that there is not enough, let's say, memory from that. Learning from that, but also in school, it would be important to have projects that tell the history of the European Union and make sure that we all realize that the more secure society is the more inclusive society, not the contrary. So building walls would not help our society to be more secure or stronger.
So can I just get back to the participation? So this is kind of to do with youth participation. So how can we, the youth, kind of get to the MEPs to kind of tell them that, look, there's racism in our area and we need to fix this problem?
In many ways, write to us. We are now in times where you can tweet us, you can post us on Facebook, you can tag us on Instagram. There are a lot of ways, and many of us are very open to this kind of dialogue. And I'll tell you something, we are traveling all across our countries and the European Union, but the best things and the most interesting question we get from a situation with young people in all different environments, but it's very crucial for us to keep this dialogue open. And also we can do events like the one of yesterday to hear your voices and your concerns and try to have this fruitful dialogue in order to be able to get answers for the worries of our citizens. So thanks really for this discussion.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we need to wrap up because there is the next,
the next discussion.
Session. So thank you very much for that.
No
thank you, Edmund, and thank you, Carla. Thank you very much, Ali.
Thank you.